Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining us. Glad that you're here in the sanctuary with me, wherever you are at home. We're going to begin this morning with Ma Tovu on page 101 in our Sidurim. Ma Tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkeno, Techa Yisrael, Ma Tovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkeno, Techa Yisrael. We'll continue with Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings, page 103. I'll invite you to rise if you're able. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lesech v'ivin al havchin, ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzamo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokev kefufim. Baruch Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzarei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'ya'ef koach. You can be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Udneinu hayom uv'chol yom, lecheinu chesed u'rachamim be'einecha u'beinei choroenu, v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai Gomel chasadim tovim amo Yisrael. We'll turn to 112 for the Psalm for Shabbat. Hayom yom Shabbat kodesh, shebo hayu haleviim omrim beveit hamikdash, mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov lehodot ladonai, uzamer l'shimcha yom nagid baboker chastecha v'menacha b'leil. Tzadik atamar yifrach ke'erez balevanon yizgash atulim beveit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenuvun beseva deshenim vera'ananim yehiyu lehagid ki ashar Adonai tzuri velo avla tabo. We'll turn to 120. Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit leDavid, arum Adonai kedili tani velo simach toy vayli Adonai lo Adonai mizam shechatan zamar l'Adonai. Elech Adonai Kravi El Adonai Et Chanan Ma Bet Abedalim El Shagadai Hafachta Mispadi Lamacholi Pitachta Saki Vitazrei Simcha Leman Yisamercha Chavod Velo Yidom Adonai Elohai Leolam Otzeka. We'll rise on page 122 for Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar V'haya Ha'olam Baruch Hu Baruch Oseh V'Reishit Baruch Shemo Baruch Omer V'Oseh Baruch Hu Baruch Gozer U'Mekayem Baruch Shemo Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz Baruch Hu Baruch Merachem Al Haberiot Baruch Shemo Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov Lireyav Baruch Hu Baruch Chayla Ad V'Kayam LaNetzach Baruch Shemo Baruch Poda Umatzil Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Yachid Chai Haolamim Melech Meshubach Umfor De'ad Shema Gadol Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Mehulal Batish Bachot. You can be seated. We'll continue on the top of the next page, 123. Hodu Ladonai Kiru Vishmo Hodu Vami Malilo Tab Shirilo Zamrilo Sichopane Vidil Abishon Nishavan Moshon Moshamish Bedepiu Saris Lavdo Benayako Fakir Abu Adonai Their time is parking out for Garim Bavi. Ki gadol Adonai mula me'or v'norahu al kol Elohim ki kol Elohei amim elilim v'Adonai shamayim asa hod v'hadar lefanav oz v'ched v'abim kamo havu l'Adonai mishpachot amim havu l'Adonai kavod roz havu l'Adonai kavod shemos umil havu l'Adonai v'shach l'Adonai chilu mefanav kol ha'aretz haftu gandevel b'adonai manis m'chashoyim v'dagelar v'yom manama Yiram hayam ulo yalatzot v'chol asher ba'az yavanu atzeh hayar milifnei Adonai kival lishpot et haaretz. Ramamu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lahadom raglav kadoshu. Ramamu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lahar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Ve'u rachum yechaper avon ve'lo yashchid v'hirbala shiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato atad l'jeglav. Adonai Tzevaot, Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach, Adonai Hoshia, Melech Yaneinu, Veyom Koreinu, Hoshia et Amecha, Uvarech et Nachalatecha, Ureim v'naseim ad olam, Nafshenu chikta l'Adonai, Ezreinu Magini, Kival Yismach Leben, and Kiv Shem Kusham Va'ani b'chastecha v'tachti, Ageli b'bishuatecha, Ashir al Adonai, Ki gamal alai. We'll turn to page 130, the last line or the last two lines of the page that repeat themselves. Orech yamim aspiehu ve'arehu b'shuati. I shall deliver you with the fullness of days and show you my deliverance, God says. Orech yamim aspiehu ve'arehu b'shuati. 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 Orech yamim aspiehu Arehu ve'arehu b'yeshuati Orach yamim aspiehu ve'arehu b'yeshuati Orach yamim aspiehu ve'arehu b'yeshuati Orach yamim aspiehu ve'arehu b'yeshuati. We'll turn to page 136. 136. Ashrei yoshvei veitecha od yehalelu chasela Ashrei ha'am shekacha lo Ashrei ha'am sh'Adonai Elohav zilenu. Tehilat Adonai yidaber pi v'yivarech basar Shem kodsho le'olam va'ed v'anachnu nevarech ya me'atav yad olam. Hallelujah. We turn to 141 for Psalm 150. Hallelujah, 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 bekodsho. Hallelujah, 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 berkia uzo. Hallelujah, vigvoratav. Hallelujah, Kerav Gudlam. Hallelujah, Beteka Shofar. Hallelujah, Benevel Vechinor. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, Betofum Macho. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, Beminim Ve'ugav. Hallelujah, v'tiltulei shama. Hallelujah, v'tiltulei Torah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen. Baruch Adonai Uvarach Shem Kevodo Le'olam V'yimalech Vodo Kol Haaretz Amen V'Amen. We rise 142. Vayivarech David Adonai Le'nei Kol Kahal Vayomer David Baruch Atah Adonai Elohei Yisrael V'ad Olam V'chadnai Hagdula V'Hagbara V'Tefer V'Netzach V'Elokei Kol B'Shemayim V'Ratzach V'Machal Atahu Adonai Elohim, Asher Bacharta be'Avram, Hotzeto me'or kastim, V'samta shemo Avraham, Umatata et levavo, Ne'eman lefanecha, V'charot imo habrit, Latet et eretz hakanani, Achiti amori v'arbuzi, V'yivusi v'girgashi latet, Lizaro, V'etakem v'recha kitzadikata, V'tertuni Vayam bakata lifnehem, ve'avru b'tochayam be'abasha, v'etrotfehem ishlach tavim tolot, kemo even b'mayim azim, v'ayosha Adonai, v'yom hahu et Yisrael mi'an Mitzrayim, v'yar Yisrael Mitzrayim, v'yar Yisrael te'era gdola, asher asa Adonai be'Mitzrayim, v'yiruha met Adonai, v'yaminu b'Adonai uv'Moshe avdo, Az Yashir Moshe Uvenei Yisrael Adashira Hazot Ladonai Vayamru Lemar Ashir Ladonai Kika Oga Sus Verachvo Rama Vayam Mozivin. Shamu amim yirgazon chilachaz yishvei flasheraz yimalo v'tamalim yirgazim namagu kol yishvei kanan tipal aleichem imam v'tavavacham Adonai yimloch leolam va'er v'tikach Miriam haneviyah achot Aharon et hatof beyada v'tetzana kol hanashim achareha betupim uvimcholot v'atan lahem Miriam shir l'Adonai ki ga'o ga'a sus v'rachvo rama vayam Ki l'Adonai mlucha Moshe b'goyim v'alu moshim b'hartzion lishpot et haresav v'hayetza l'Adonai mlucha v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom ha'u Adonai echad u'shemo echad. You can be seated. We'll continue at the top of 145 with Nishmat Kol Chai. Nishmat Kol Chai Tevarech et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu V'Ruach Kol Basar Tefaer Titrem Zichracha Malkeinu Tamid Min Haolam Ve'ad Haolam Ata El U'Mibaladecha Ein Lanu Melech Oel U'Moshiach Podeh U'Matzil U'Mfarnes U'Marchem B'Chol Eitz Hara V'Tzukah Ein Lanu Melech Ela Ata Elohei Harishonim V'Acharonim Eloha Kol Briot Adon Kol Toladot Amula Barov Atishbachot Hamaneheg Alomo B'Chesed U'Vriotav B'Rachamim V'Adonai Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan Hame'orer Yeshenim V'Hamekitz Nirdamim V'Hamesiach Hilamim V'Hamatir Asurim V'Asmech Noflim V'Azokev Kefufim Lecha Levadcha Anachnu Modim Hilufinu Maleh Shira Kayam Ulshonenu Reina Ka'amon Galav V'Siftotenu Sheva Kamer Chavei Rakyam. Bottom of 146, the second to last line, starting with the second word. Barchi nafshi et Adonai v'chokravai et Shem kodsho B'tatzotu zecha hagadol b'chevod shemecha hagibor lanetzach Benorotecha HaMelech HaYoshev Al Kisei Ram Venisa. This concludes Pesukei de Zimra, our preliminary service. We'll continue with Shacharit on page 147, the sixth line. Shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv rananu tzadikim bananai v'yesharim navateilam. B'fi yesharim titalal uvdivrei tzadikim titbarach Uvilshon chasidim titromam uvkerev kedoshim titkadash uvmakalot rivavot amecha beit Yisrael berinait parshim chamakenu bechol dormana. שכן חובת כל היצורים לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, לעלה ולקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך. We rise for Yishtabach, page 148. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו אל המלך כי לך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות הבוחר בשירי זמרה מלך אלכי העולמים. You can be seated. We continue at the top of page 150. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol hakol yoducha והכל ישבחוך, והכל יאמרו אין קדוש, כאדוני, הכל יאמרו חזון. אין קרקך ואין זולתך, פספילתך ומידו מלך. אין קרקך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא. אפס פילתך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים, ברוך ומבורך בפיקו נשמה, גודלו וטובו מלא עולם, דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו, המתגאה חיות הקודש ונדר, בכבוד על המרכבה זכות ומישור לפני חיסו חסד, ורחמים לפני כבודו, טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם, בדעת בבינה ובהשכל, כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים, בקרב תבל מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה נאה, זיוום בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בימה רצון קונם, פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמו, צהולה ורינה לזכר מלכותו, קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה והתקין צורת הלבנה, שבח נותנים לו כל צבע מרום, תפארת וגדולה, רפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש. לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים ביום השביעי, התעלה וישב על כיסא כבודו, תפארת אתה ליום המנוחה ונקרא ליום המנוחה. תתברך מושיענו על שבח מעשה ידיך ועל מאורי אור שעשית יפרוך הסלע. Top of 153. תתברך צורנו מלכנו וגואלנו, בורא קדושים, ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, יוצר כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים באימה וביראה רצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים ומפארים, ומעריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל, המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, הקדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ורוח ונימה קדושה, כולם כאחד, עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מתנשאים לעומת שרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, לאל ברוך נמו תיתנו למלך אל חי וקיים, זמירת יאמרו ותשבחות ישמיעו כבוד. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו, ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו, תרחמת עלינו, אבינו מלכנו בעבור אבותינו. כי בשם קודשך נגילה ונשמחה בשבועתך. והביאנו לשלום בכנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי אל פועל ישועה ובחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך סלע סלע באמת, להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד, ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך וכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, והיה אם שמעת תשמע זה אשר נחם איתם. I'm running. I am Muslim. I'm going to convey him the dirt. I'm going to know to do. I'm going to have to have a vayalachem, but to וראיתם אותו וזכרתם בכל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטו אחרי לרעכם באחריכם אשר אתם שונאים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לרעכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת ויציב ונכון וקיים וישר ונאמן ואהוב וחביב ונחמד ונעים ונורא ואדיר ומתוקן ומקובל וטוב ויפה והדבר הזה לדור ודור קיים ושמו קיים וכיסו נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת ודבריו חיים וקיימים מעולמים על אבותינו ועל אבותינו אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו מצילנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם מגן משה ונעים תהילות לעליון ברוך ומבורך משה ומרים ובני ישראל לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות עושה פלא שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפתיים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובטחנו ממך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני גאל Yisrael. We'll begin together the Amidah, reciting the first two brachot out loud. After that, you'll skip the Kedusha and continue davening silently on your own. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Vekonei Hakol וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומיתו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים, אתה קדוש ושמך, קדוש וקדוש המלך, ברוך אתה אדוני האל, קדוש יתמך במזון, כל להיות תפארת בנו. Oh, say shalom, shalom, imromav. Oh, yaseh shalom. Oh, say shalom, shalom, imromav. Oh, yaseh shalom. Oh, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imero amen. We'll turn now to our laning for this week. This week we read from Parshat Yitro. Yitro is the Parsha in the Torah in the middle of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, where we read about revelation, the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, and I'll speak about that more a little bit later. We receive the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances or the 10 commandments that Moshe brings down. I'm going to lane this morning from the middle of the Parsha, which has those Aseret HaDibrot. Even though we typically read 1/3 of the Parsha in a regular week in Shul, the way the triennial reading is broken down is that every year we end up reading the 10 Commandments. So that we never go a year in our cycle of reading Torah where we don't read the 10 Commandments, so we will read them this morning as well. If you're in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, this maroon Chumash, we are on page 440. If you're looking at another Chumash or a Tanakh, we are in Shemot, Exodus chapter 19. I'll begin with verse 20. In the middle of the page where it says Shishi, on the right side of the column. This is verse 20. I'll read and then I'll translate, of course, as I do. This is a little bit of a longer reading than I usually read because we're going to include all the 10 Commandments. And just before we get to the 10 Commandments, I'll indicate to you that it's a time to rise. If you're able to, traditionally we rise out of reverence and respect for what's happening as we read. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kidashanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Vayered Adonai al har Sinai el rosh hahar, vayikra Adonai leMoshe el rosh hahar, vayal Moshe, vayomer Adonai el Moshe, red ha'ed ba'am, pen yarsu el Adonai lirod, v'nafal mimenu rav, v'gam hakohanim, hanigashim el Adonai yitkadashu, pen yifrot bahem Adonai, vayomer Moshe el Adonai, lo yuchal ha'am la'alot el har Sinai, ki ata haidota banu lemor, hagbel et hahar v'kidashto, vayomer elav Adonai, lech red v'alita ata v'aron imach, v'hakohanim v'ha'am, al yarsu la'alot el Adonai, pen yifrot bam. Vayered Moshe el ha'am, vayomer alehem, vayedaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'ele lemor. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeiticha, me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim, lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, al panai, lo taseh lecha fesel v'chol temuna, asher bashamayim mimal, v'asher ba'aretz mitachat, v'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz. Lo tishtachav elahem, velo ta'ovdem, ki anochi Adonai Elohecha Elkanah, poked avon avot al banim, al shileshim va'al ribeim lesonai, ve'oseh chesed la'alafim, la'ohavai u'shomrei mitzvotai, lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh Adonai et asher yisa et shemo lashav. Zachor et yom haShabbat lekadesho, sheshet yamim ta'avod, v'asita chol malachtecha, v'yom hashvi'i Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha. Lo taseh chol melacha, ata uvincha uvitecha, avdecha ve'amatecha, uvehemtecha, ve'gercha asher bisharecha, ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz, et hayam v'et kol asher bam, vayanach bayom hashevi, al ken berach Adonai et yom haShabbat vayikadshehu. Kabel et avicha ve'et imecha, l'mahan yarichon yamecha, al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. Lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov, lo ta'neh v'recha ed sheker, lo tachmod beit re'echa, lo tachmod eshet re'echa, ve'avdo ve'amato ve'shoro ve'chamoro ve'chol asher le're'echa. You can take a seat. Beginning with verse 20. Adonai came down on Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up. Adonai said to Moshe, "Go down, warn the people not to break through to Adonai to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also who came near to the Lord must stay pure, lest the Lord break out against them." But Moshe said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds about the mountain and sanctify it.'" So Adonai said to him, "Go down and come back together with Aaron, but lest not the priests or the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest God break out against them." And Moshe went down to the people and spoke to them. God spoke all these words, saying, "I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods but me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of Adonai your God, for Adonai will not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath for Adonai your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and God rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land, and that Adonai your God is assigning to you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female slave, or his ox or his ass, or anything that is. This week, as we read Parshat Yitro, we read this grand moment of experience as Jews. The giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. Revelation, the greatest moment that we had of God encountering with human beings, interacting, giving us God's law. And our tradition says that all of us were at that moment that I just read about. All of us were there at the experience of Mount Sinai. And so all of us are bound by this Torah. It brings us all together. It's part of our glue as a people, and it's part of what makes us unique and different. And for me, if I was there too, and if you were there too, and if we were there together, and we are now in 2021 or 5781, depending on how you're counting, I want to understand what this means for me as an individual, and maybe for you as well. How do I read what happened so long ago that's part of our spiritual history and think about what it can mean for me? So today, I want to look at 3 or 4 theologians and how they view that moment. I want to read through, offer some perspectives from these theologians, and in many ways I was drawn to the ones that I brought because maybe they're radical in their thinking, radical because they put some responsibility on us to think as Jews and to find ourselves inside of this text. It's radical because, well, maybe you'll tell me afterwards why you think it's radical, but because it says that these perspectives offer the idea that it's not limited to what happened at Mount Sinai, but what we as Jews do with that moment afterwards. I'd love to hear from you later on in this week if one of these perspectives speaks to you. The first is from a Bible professor in Israel, currently, as she teaches at Bar Ilan University, named Tamar Ross. Professor Ross teaches a theological model based on a notion that she calls cumulative revelation. She articulates that we should view Sinaitic Torah, meaning the Torah given at Sinai, as merely the earthly reflection of a metaphysical Torah which must be supplemented by history in order to be its full self. That is, the unfolding revelations of God in history have to accompany the moment that I just read about. In this view, humans have no direct, unmediated access to the metaphysical Torah except through the cumulative unfolding of the divine will throughout history. In each generation, she says, God is revealed in different ways. What I think Professor Ross is saying here is that Torah is continually revealed throughout history based on our own interactions with people and with God. Her view is teaching that we are always building on the past and that we are creating infinite layers of revealed tradition through our lived experience as Jews. I personally find a lot of meaning in this view because I find it to be empowering. It means that we have the ability to unearth new learning, new Torah that was maybe given at Sinai, but we weren't able to bring it to its full expression until this moment in our life, where we are and bringing it to life. We are able to find new ways that God functions in the world, and that is a part of cumulative revelation. A second perspective I want to share comes from the teacher Aviva Zornberg, who also teaches now in Israel, in Jerusalem. She often writes about the myth of Sinai. For some people, that word, when it comes to our tradition, is a bit triggering, the myth of Sinai. She speaks about the myth of Sinai as a foundational component of our theological and communal consciousness, but not as a literal historical event. And in an interview I read with her this week, she was asked the following. Speaking of revelation, the myth of Sinai and giving of Torah is one of the most thoroughly discussed themes in your work. Do you, Aviva Zornberg, have a non-mythic historical vision of Sinai as well? And if so, how do you reconcile these visions? This is how she responded. I place myself in the tradition of Midrashic and Hasidic accounts of Revelation, which has always been interested in its human meaning rather than in its historical truth claims. Dogmatic issues, when, where, what, are of less interest to me, since the Torah itself is written in a language that de-emphasizes such questions. Zornberg seems to be saying that the historical truth of the event isn't really so meaningful or even relevant to her. And one of the things that I find meaningful about that is, to me, it also doesn't matter. I can believe in the tradition of spiritual history, that each of us were here at this moment and that this impacts who I am as a Jew, whether or not it actually happened or not. And what Zornberg articulates is that she's interested in its human meaning, where she can locate herself inside of Torah. To me, as a Jew, not as a rabbi, but as a Jew, I want to be invested in that project. How do I find myself in this book, in this teaching? And how do I push myself when there are times when I inevitably feel disconnected to say, the goal is actually human meaning. So I need to dig deeper inside to see where I can find myself. This perspective feels especially meaningful to me because it pushes us as learners, as Jews, as doers, to seek out meaning in Torah and mitzvot, not just to do them because we're supposed to or we think it's right, but because there's some meaning as humans in our engagement with this book. And she said that she locates herself in the Hasidic account of Revelation. So I want to share something about that. Here's another idea. There's a Hasidic idea that's especially written about in the Ma'or Einayim and the Sfat Emet, that every mitzvah is an opportunity to connect with God. The teaching says, read the word mitzvah not as commandment, but as connection. In that way, a mitzvah is a form of technology of communicating and connecting with God. I called Danny Kraft yesterday when I was thinking about this, and he said to me that for him, this means that the connection with God and the connection with Jewish people throughout time and space comes alive. He said, when I put on tefillin, I am also my grandfather putting on tefillin, and his grandfather, and on and on. It's a collapsing of time and space where we can connect to all of those elements and other people and God through the opportunity of mitzvot. In this idea, there is potential in each expression of obligation to find God. In thinking about Torah and the revelation of Torah at Sinai, it's easy to imagine a very top-down experience. The grand mountain with God as a powerful force, the commandments of what we have to do to be good Jews. But this view isn't one of aggressive hierarchical obligation. It's one that enables us to view every single part of Torah as an avenue for connecting with God, or as Danny put it to me, connecting to history and the past. I want to share one more view from the late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Heschel once wrote about a chassid who attended a lecture on God given by a famous philosopher. And that lecturer spent his allotted time describing God in subtle and noble concepts. When asked for his reaction from the lecturer, the chassid replied, well, if God were the way you imagine him, I wouldn't believe in him. For Heschel, literally to imagine revelation or to conceive of it as if it were a physical process was to pervert its essence. When defined, described, it completely eludes us, Heschel wrote. He wrote that what happened at Sinai, what we read this morning, was as unimaginable to us as it was unbelievable to those who witnessed it. Any description of the act of revelation in empirical categories would have produced a caricature. This is why all the Bible does is to state that revelation happened. How it happened is something that could only convey in words that are evocative and suggestive, Heschel wrote. Heschel doesn't want us, though, to leave with the idea that we can't know anything about revelation, as if it's a total mystery. Because Heschel teaches that what we can know about this moment is that it was God searching for us, for humanity. It's God calling out to us and finding us. This feels like the perfect complement to the notion that each and every mitzvah is an opportunity for connection with the divine and others. If the moment of Matan Torah, the giving of Torah, according to Heschel, is God searching for us, calling out to us, our acceptance of the mitzvot and our performance of them is a response. It's our way of saying, yes, God, I hear you, and I'm answering your call to be in relationship with you. Each of these four perspectives collectively felt meaningful to me. Tamar Ross is thinking about cumulative theology, and she locates us as a part of the story because it is ever unfolding. It means that what we do is Torah and is godly, and it shapes the way that the future and understandings of Torah and God will happen. My impulse is often to want to know the who and what and where, and Zornberg reminds me that these details aren't the ikar, they are not the essence. Zornberg's emphasis on human meaning empowers us to ask not just about the mitzvot in the Torah or the teachings in the Torah, but to ask about ourselves and our relationship to them. The Hasidic view of mitzvah as connection pushes me not to view the mitzvot just as things I do to carry out Jewish law, but as spiritual technologies to create and develop and maintain a relationship with God. It imbues every single Jewish thing I do with potential for godliness. And finally, Heschel. From Heschel, I am reminded that the details of the event aren't as relevant as the fact that this moment of Matan Torah was a moment of God calling out, searching for us as people. This was God's call to us to be higher, elevated beings. And we have the opportunity to respond to that call. Our tradition teaches that each of us were there. Each of us were in that moment. And I hope that each of us, as we reach into ourselves, back in time, forward in time, and try and locate ourselves in that moment, that we are also able to find our own meaning of what revelation, what Matan Torah can be for us. Kein Yehi Ratzon. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. 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 We'll include now a Misha Berach for Cholim, a prayer for all who are ill. When I pause, I invite you to include names of those that you're davening for. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov ve'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachav Leah hu yivarech v'yirapeh ha'cholim. At Hayden Adams, Sandy Armis, Daft Ashkenazi, Ami Ashkenazi, Tel Ashkenazi, Eileen Carol Battleman, Helen Beavers, Ricky Beavers, David Bennett, Janice Berlin, Brody Brayman, Sandra Bresnick, Jane Brown, Beverly Cassius, Sandy Catania, Ann Coggin, Isabel Cohen, Jill Cohen, Nathan Dayan, Howard Feder, Carolyn Foley, Tom Gadberry, Lynn Gomberg, Mimi Grossman, Joe Hetzel, Harold Herlick, Marvin Jacobson, Austin Cabot, Marilyn Lieber, Aaron Linkove, Michelle Mann, Mark Mathias, Cameron Miller, Gary Murray, Alan Nadell, Marcia Nodowich, Tom O'Hara, Santa Panton, Phillips Pratt, Glenn Rainbow, Emily Schauman, Kevin Shiner, Darlene Shevsky, Lisa Shipowitz, Bud Skwarupa, Jean Stites, Susan Stein, Pat Stevens, Tom Stevens, Rachel Siegel-Strauss, Edna Wiener, Rita Witt, and Rodney Wolf, Debbie Yanks, Aaron Ben Yosef Rebecca, Chania Rivka, Bat Chana, Chavan Cyril, Bat Esther, Elka Bat Nachama, Sarah Esther, Bat Rachel, Chana Libat, Shoshana Leah, Manka Sankwatev, Bat Kittel, Moshe Ben Rachel, Ovadia, Ben Sarah, Rachaman, Ben Sarah, Rachel Sarah, Bat Leah, Yaakov David, Ben Zavor, Yehuda Selka, Bat Rachel, Yisrael Eliyahu, Ben Leah, HaKadosh, Baruch Hu Yamale Rachamim, Alehem, Lahachzikam, Ulrapotam, Veishlach Lahem Mehera, Refuah Shlema, Min Hashamayim, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, B'toch Shar HaCholim, V'chazek et Yirei Hauskim B'tzorchehem, Shabbat Himilizok, Urfuat Rava Levo, Hashta Bagalav Izman Kariv, Venomar Amen. El Na Refana Lanu, El Na Refana Lanu, El Na Refana Lanu, Refu Before we move to concluding the service, I want to turn to page 180. We'll offer the prayer for the new month. We have a Rosh Chodesh coming up this week on Friday and next Shabbat, which means next Shabbat will also be including Hallel in our davening. I'll turn to page 180. I'll invite you to join me on the left-hand side of the page in English. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, grant that this month bring us goodness and blessing and bestow on us a long life, a life that is peaceful, a life that is good, a life that is blessed, a life with proper sustenance, a life with physical vitality, a life conscious of heaven's demands and wary of sin, a life free of shame and reproach, a life of abundance and honor, a life of love of Torah, conscious of heaven's demands, a life in which the worthy desires of our hearts are fulfilled. Amen. Mi she'asa nisim la'avoteinu, mi she'asa nisim le'imoteinu, v'ga'alota me'avdut le'chairut, hu yigalotanu b'karov, v'kabetz nidachenu me'arba kanfot ha'aretz, chaverim kol Yisrael, v'nomar amen. Rosh Chodesh Adar, yeh b'yom shishi u'v'yom Shabbat Kodesh, haba aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael letova, yechadesheu HaKadosh Baruch Hu aleinu ve'al kol amo Beit Yisrael lechayim u'shalom, lesason u'simcha, Lishua Nechama v'nomar Amen. We'll turn to end our service together with Ein Keloheinu, page 204. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shehiktiru Avotenu Lefanecha Ketoret Asamim. Yanai, nanai, nanai, yanai, 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 nanai, nanai, yanai, nanai, yanai, nanai, nanai, yanai, 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 nanai, nanai, yanai. We'll rise for Aleinu, page 205. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoyei ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot adama, shelo sam chalkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, va'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, shehu noteh shamayim ve'osed haaretz, u'moshe v'karo b'shamayim imal, u'shchinatu zo, begovei meromim, hu Eloheinu ein od, emet malkeinu efes ulato, kakatuv betorato, ve'adatayom ve'hashevota el levavecha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, b'shamayim imal, ve'al haaretz mitachat ein od. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. You can be seated. In the coming week, we honor the yahrzeits of the following: Leon Hellman, Fanny Gladstein, Harold Mann, Benny Nickel, Ray Halpern, Sandra Wurzburg, David Friedman, Bertha Nickel, Rose Sabison, Nate Goller, Lena Cooper, Mary Shaneberg, Hallie Cohen, Maxwell Kruger, Solomon Benjamin, Rose Metzger, Irving Malamed, and Louis Phillips. I invite all those who are in mourning or observing a yahrzeit to join me in our modified Mourner's Kaddish, page 207. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlam arab amin shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us. We have some birthdays and anniversary, Mazal Tovs, to give people. Happy birthday today to Jordan Marks Gow, to Carol Littman, and to Max Sabin. Happy birthday to all of you, birthdays today. And the rest of the week, Paula Miller, Elena Feynman, Billy Nickel, Gail Phillips, Emily Siegler, Bruce Feldbaum, Chris Madej, Alan Israel, Joaquim Horowitz, and Melissa Reyna. Mazal Tov, happy birthday to all of you. And Mazal Tov on an anniversary tomorrow to Carrie and Dan Unowski. Mazal Tov to y'all. A few announcements on Thursday evening of this week. Is that right? Thursday evening of this week, I'll be leading Women's Rosh Chodesh group in advance of Rosh Chodesh, which is on Friday. Any other announcements? No other announcements. We'll continue with Adon Olam on page 211. You want to come up for Adon Olam? Come here. You're going to sing with me? Okay. Ready? Adon Olam asher malach v'terem ko yatzir nivra li'et nasa bechevtzo ko azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora vehu haya vehu hove vehu yiyeh betifara vehu yiyeh betifara vehu echad ve'yem sheni laham shilo lehachbira beli reshim beli tachlit velo ha'oz v'hamisra velo ha'oz v'hamisra vehu eli v'chai go'ali v'tzor chavli beyetzara vehu nisi umanosli menakosi beyom ekra menakosi beyom ekra beyado avkid ruchi be'et ishan be'ya'ira ve'im ruchi Geviati Adonai li velo ira. Adonai li velo ira. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for davening along with me from the sanctuary, you wherever you are. Hope that we'll see you in person or on Zoom soon. Shabbat Shalom. You want to say bye, Shabbat Shalom? What do you say, Shabbat Shalom?
Amy.
Yeah, Ema was davening. Was Lavi davening? You're davening? Adon Olam. Is that what you're singing? You want to do it again? Adon Olam.
Book.
That's the book. That's the Siddur.
A dog.
Adon Olam. A dog.
A dog.
Nolam. Asher Malach. Are we just going to keep singing Adon Olam? Hi, bud.
Amy.
Yeah, Cuckoo.